Good evening and welcome back to ParaGhoul Paranormal, Discoveries from the Dark, the radio show where we dive into the shadows of Saskatchewan, and sometimes across Canada, to see what secrets lie within. I'm your host, K.D. Kulpa. I'm a horror author and paranormal researcher based here in Regina, Saskatchewan. Tonight, we are digging into the history of the paranormal field again. This time, we're looking into the Ouija board. I don't know about you, but when I was young, we thought it was a fun game to play with at sleepovers. Now, I likely wouldn't even touch one, even if it was all make-believe, as I just don't fully understand what could be on the other side. But turn down the lights and take a seat as we summon up the origins of the Ouija board. So the last time we went back into the past to consider the evolution of the paranormal field, we focused on EVPs. If you don't recall, EVPs stand for electronic voice phenomena, and it became a widely used method for trying to speak to the dead around the same time that, radios and communication devices to long distances started to come to be. So tonight we're going to talk about a different sort of communication, one that is considered a toy to some people, and a doorway to letting a demon into your home by others. At least, that always seems to be the direction they take on paranormal television shows. The use of a Ouija board is considered a fast way to get an evil infestation into your home. But where did the Ouija board, or Ouija board, depending on who you talk to, even come from? Why did it become used as a communication device with the dead? Let's look into the earliest records of the Ouija board to see if we can figure that out. So the Ouija board has been called many names. So you might have heard it called instead a spirit board, or a talking board, or even a witch board. The one that I recall from my childhood is just a flat wooden board with letters, numbers, the words yes and no, and then the words hello and goodbye written on it. Typically, we would turn off most of the lights when using one, waiting until late at night, usually as close to midnight as you can get, and then the two bravest in the room would lightly touch their fingertips to the planchette, which was typically a heart-shaped kind of piece of plastic, or maybe it was wood and it had these small legs, and the legs always had those little pieces of felt on the bottom, so it could slide easily on the board. But then we would all wait as the small plastic clear window in the middle of the planchette, or the little pointer on the end, would hover over letters, numbers, or words as it seemed to magically move around the board. But it would never move unless our hands are touching it. But what was the first Ouija board, and why did they think they were talking to the deceased? When I started digging into this exact question, I wasn't too surprised to learn that the Ouija board that we now know isn't actually that old. So the earliest record of the board itself is actually in the 1880s. If you recall, it was around the 1840s that the spiritualist movement kind of was starting to pick up in North America. This was also the time that the two sisters, if you recall, their names were Maggie and Kate Fox. And they were going around telling everyone that they could hear knocks from a ghost in their home, and that this ghost would knock in, response to questions that they asked it. So they felt that they were communicating with the dead. From what I could find, prior to the Ouija board invention, communication with the dead was done through things like automatic writing, which is still something that's used today, as well as table tipping or table turning. In the latter, so this table stuff, what would happen in the seance rooms that we've talked about in previous episodes is the group in the seance would slowly say each letter of the alphabet really, slowly and letting a long pause in between. When the spirit would want to communicate, the table would either tilt or start shaking at the appropriate letter, allowing those within the seance to spell out words and phrases. Now, the claim goes that Charles Kennard, I'm not sure, of Kennard Novelty Company And Elijah Bond invented the talking board, as it was called at first. I did find some articles claiming that they thought there had to be an easier way to communicate with the dead. So at that time, everyone was doing these table tipping things or automatic writing. And these two apparently claimed that, we wanted to figure out an easier way to communicate. However, other articles I found also indicated that realistically, they were just out to make a quick buck, that they saw an opportunity to make some money because communicating with the dead was, a big deal back then. So they thought if they could make something that anyone could purchase, that you didn't have to have a medium in the room to use, then they could really, make some good money. So it was actually Elijah's sister-in-law, who went by the name of Helen Peters Nosworthy, who actually helped them, really make this a legitimate spiritualist tool back then. So she was a medium and spiritualist herself, and she ended up being the one to help prove the board's, supposed abilities to be used to communicate with the dead. They wanted to make sure that they could, have this proof, because you needed proof to, of course, get a patent. So they wanted to get a patent for the talking board so that no one else could steal their idea. And it was also Helen that actually came up with the name Ouija for the board. The story goes that she was using the board herself and asked the spirit board, or the spirit she was talking to through the board, I'm not really sure, what is the name of the board, or what do you want to be called? And at the time, it spelled out the word Ouija, or Ouija. When asked what that word meant to the board, it spelled out good luck. And that was the start of the Ouija board popularity. So you can find old newspapers that actually show the ads for these, this original talking board, as they called it. And I actually found one from the Pittsburgh Dispatch in February of 1891. And the advertisement says, Ouija, or the wonderful talking board. The Ouija is, without doubt, the most interesting, remarkable, and mysterious production of the 19th century. Its operations are always interesting and frequently invaluable, answering as it does questions concerning the past, present, and future with marvelous accuracy. It furnishes never-failing amusement and recreation for all classes. See, they're trying to get everyone to get involved. While for the scientific or thoughtful, its mysterious movements invite the most careful research and investigation, apparently forming the link which unites the known with the unknown, the material with the immaterial. It forces upon us the conviction that a great truth was contained in the statement of the Danish prince, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than were ever dreamed of in thy philosophy." So at that time, this advertisement states that the talking board was $1.49. I tried to do some kind of research into what this would equal to dollars today, and it seems like it would be around $50 to get this talking board for the first time back then, which realistically, that's a decent amount for a toy. That's from a novelty company. I don't know. But whatever happened, apparently the talking board quickly became really popular and swept the nation, especially given that the spiritualist movement helped to drive it that way. It turned out to be, such a good moneymaker for those that invested in it, as well as for Elijah and Charles. But apparently this led to many problems, as money tends to do, right? Supposedly Elijah and Charles, I couldn't tell if they left the company or if they were removed from the company. But eventually they were replaced by an employee by the name of William Fuld. So he took over running the company instead of Charles and Elijah. And eventually, he supposedly even built a brand new factory that he claimed the board had told him to build. Unfortunate for him, he also fell to his death from the roof of said factory. So I don't know if that's where, the evilness behind the board comes into things or not. But I guess, maybe. But what gave them the idea to use the planchette in this way? Like, the planchette, surprisingly, had come from previous use. So it's not brand new to the Ouija board. It had actually been used before. Although I couldn't find anything stating exactly where Elijah and Charles got this idea for the talking board. So there was some speculation that someone else actually was starting to do it elsewhere, but then they got the patent so that they could be the one to distribute it through their company, but I'm not entirely sure. What I did find out was that the planchette was used prior to the talking board even being invented. So given the planchette is an important piece in the whole setup of a Ouija board, I thought it was interesting that it had actually been around for much longer. So from what I could find, it has been used for supposedly communicating with the dead for actually thousands of years. But, where did it come from? So the word planchette is French, and when I did a translate on it, it came up with a few different definitions depending on how it's used in the sentence. For example, it could be little board, it could be small plank, it could be wooden board, it could be flat plastic board, or it could just simply be the word board, as in B-O-A-R-D, not B-O-R-E-D. I found one article that even claimed an instrument that was like a planchette, or even like a talking board actually, was used as far back as 550 BC in Greece. And Pythagoras apparently would actually use the instrument like it to interpret messages from spirits. It said something about it was more like a small table that was on wheels or something and could move. I couldn't really find any sort of explanation of how it supposedly worked, but apparently it was something like the talking board or the planchette. And it would even be used by Rome and by the Mongols. So the planchette more specifically was used in China, and this is in the Fuji practice. So Fuji means planchette writing, which was a type of automatic writing using the planchette. So in China, around 400 to 500 AD, I guess spirit writing was done using a pendulum. Then 500 years or so later, they would switch to this planchette writing instead. Again, this was considered a method to actually be communicating with the spirit world, so they still believed they were talking to spirits. And I even saw mention of potentially in necromancy on Wikipedia, but I don't know if that was a common thing in China back then or not. I would have to do more research to figure that part out. But needless to say, the planchette and talking board idea wasn't exactly something new in the late 1800s, even though the patent went to Elijah and Charles. There were many forms in a similar manner that used the same idea for communication with the dead for hundreds to even maybe thousands of years before they created this, toy, as they called it. So what is the actual science behind the Ouija board? And how did it become so popular with the paranormal industry, particularly in the darker side of the industry, since it's now commonly connected with evil and demons? At least that's what I frequently see it connected to whenever you watch, a paranormal television show and they start talking about Ouija boards. They always talk about how it's opening up a portal to the evil. So anyway, in case you have never actually used one of these or you've never seen them, the idea behind the Ouija board is that two people kind of sit on opposite sides of each other and they very, very lightly place their fingertips onto the planchette. Typically, the planchette would be, in the middle of the board when you start, and you would hope that it would start moving to either hello or to yes when you both get settled and calm, and then ask, is anyone there? Or you ask it a question. The thought behind this method is that a spirit will use your energy, which is connected to the planchette, through your fingers to move the small plastic piece or wood piece or whatever it is around the board, pointing to letters, numbers, or, the words like we said before. And as it moves around, you start to notice the letters and try to spell out the word that this supposed spirit is trying to give to you. I mean, I've also seen them done with even just a glass. So like having a board with letters written on it, and they use a drinking glass because it's clear to let it go around the board. So you can even make your own homemade one if you really wanted to. But the idea is kind of very similar. So supposedly you can ask the spirit to tell you things about the future through the board, or to answer questions that you might not know the answer about. Or, if you're wanting to test it, maybe you're asking questions that only someone in the room would know, and so you expect them to be able to tell you the answer. The most important part of the Ouija board, according to those that believe it truly can communicate with the dead, or like in the television shows in the paranormal industry, is that you have to say goodbye before you remove your hands from the board. So the claim goes that if you forget to say goodbye, or you don't say goodbye and you remove your hands from the board, you're leaving a portal open to the other side. And then this is where they say that this allows ghosts or demons or other evil to come through and stay within our realm. Like I said, I've seen many paranormal investigation television shows that make the claim that these hauntings are likely happening in a particular location, especially those dark and evil hauntings, because of the use of a Ouija board, and usually it's on top of the practice of seances. So usually it's the combination of the two that they say, oh, they did seances, and at these seances they had a Ouija board. Of course, like everything in the paranormal field, however, there is a lot of criticism against the Ouija board in particular. So I thought, why not talk a little bit about the actual, scientific studies and criticism that has gone against the Ouija board, in stating that it is actually just a toy and it is not communicating with the dead. So, naturally, just like a lot of things in the paranormal field, the use of Ouija boards in an attempt to communicate with the dead is considered a pseudoscience. With the talking board in particular, though, there have been some studies scientifically, like by the scientific community, that has gone into why the planchette moves the way it does. And in their mind, it is not because of ghosts, or at least this is according to scientists. One of the earliest studies, which focused on table tipping at the time, because Ouija boards weren't a thing yet, was actually conducted by Michael Faraday in 1853. As I mentioned earlier, table tipping or table turning was one of the common ways to communicate with the dead during a seance. So where the table would shake or move with the group when they got to a specific letter in the alphabet as they were saying each letter slowly out loud. So very similar to that of Ouija board. The phenomenon that they use to explain both methods, so like what actually happens in both cases, is called the ideomotor response. This is a psychological phenomenon where unconscious muscle movements or reflexes cause the table or planchette, in the Ouija case, to move in a way that appears to be paranormal, or appears to be, caused by some unknown force. One study, led by Mark Anderson in 2018, was actually conducted at a paranormal conference in Denmark. So they actually went to one of these conferences, because they still do paranormal conferences all over the world. And at this study, they had a group of 40 Ouija board experienced users. So these were people that believe in the Ouija board and were at this conference. And they were all willing to be part of the experiment. The theory of this particular study was to track unconscious eye movements during the use of a Ouija board. So the researchers were looking to prove that the eyes of the users could travel to the letter before the planchette did. So, they were predicting which letter was going to come next. And I'm assuming this is to add to, that theory that unconscious muscle movements are what causes the planchette to move in the first place. So if our eyes go to a letter a millisecond before the planchette gets there, then the theory would definitely back up that kind of idea, right? So in the study, they found that typically at first, the letters might appear at random. So, the eyes didn't go to the letters. They would be actually completely random. But as the letters started to unfold and, you started to get an idea of what a word could be, then eye movement started to show that at least one person of the pair was predicting the next letter. So, an unconscious eye movement would move to the letter before the planchette did. And this reminds me of the EVP's criticism as well, of our brains trying to find meaning and patterns in random noise or random words generated by white noise, or the random voices you hear through the mixed radio waves that they use on those shows. It's that kind of same idea. The study also concluded that a Ouija board session is only deemed successful and paranormal when there is a joint action of this kind of movement. So that, as in each person involved in doing the Ouija board session are actually taking turns predicting letters without knowing it. So the combined effort with involuntary muscle movements and the predicting of letters by our eye movements is causing these mysterious messages from the dead. So, because neither of them are predicting every letter, they think that, okay, this is coming from somebody else, or some unknown force is causing this message to come through. Other scientists have also claimed that perhaps the Ouija board is simply our unconscious mind answering questions and not actually ghosts. So they've done studies where someone was blindfolded while using the Ouija board and made to think that someone else was doing it with them. But when realistically the other person had removed their hands and it was them by themselves answering the questions with the planchette. And so in those instances, they would do a comparison. They would ask certain questions beforehand without the Ouija board involved. And they found that people would typically get the answers about 50% right. And when they asked them during the Ouija session while the person was blindfolded and they were expecting some, unknown force to be answering for them, they were actually right about 65% of the time. So it's interesting that it actually, goes up. So now the scientific community believes that instead of talking to ghosts with the Ouija board or a talking board, we're actually talking to our subconscious mind. So we're letting go of control via our conscious thinking mind and letting that subconscious, something else within us to take over. And maybe this means that the Ouija board might one day become a device used in psychology instead of the paranormal. I don't know. Who knows, right? Anyway, of course, you still see Ouija boards used today. I've seen them used in paranormal television shows, as we talked about, as a way to communicate with evil spirits of a house. They've also been used in horror movies, television shows, horror books. I've seen them everywhere. And they usually cause something evil to come through the, supposed portal that you're creating just by placing your hands on the planchette. The fact that they have Ouija conferences as part of paranormal conferences around the world shows you that there still is a large population of people that believe that they truly connect with the dead when they're using them. But what do you think? Personally, I'm not entirely sure. I used them a lot as a kid, mainly because they were fun and caused a little bit of, fear because you weren't sure who you were talking to. But at the same time, there was always someone convinced that the other person was pushing the planchette around the board. And it does make me wonder, if you were to blindfold both people using the Ouija board, what would happen? If you don't tell them what letters are being spelled out so they can't start to predict the next letter, would they come up with an actual message, or would it just be scrambled letters? I think that would be an interesting experiment to try. And someone might have even tried it somewhere in the world. I just don't know what the results would be, but it's something I might look into one day. Either way, I'm now firmly on the side that just doesn't play with the Ouija board. Whether it's a portal that allows you to talk to the dead, a gateway for evil to come through, or simply a chance to have a talk with your subconscious, I'm leaving the board in the box for now. What about you? Anyway, thank you for joining us tonight. Don't forget, if you'd like to support the show, you can find me on most social media platforms under KDKULPA. I also have a Patreon for those that want behind the scenes information, extra content like the video clips from interviews, and a chance to join a live Q&A with me each month. Next week, we have another guest coming on the show. I will be joined by Helen Power, an author of the spooky thrillers Phantom and The Ghosts of Thorwald Place. I'm sure we will talk a little bit about her novels, but also about her fascination with the paranormal. She is another one that, like us, that like the paranormal. And I can't wait to learn more about her experiences and the haunted places that she's had a chance to visit. I know that there have been quite a few, so I can't wait to hear, if she's had any experiences within them. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, where we'll uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and delve deeper into the shadows. Until then, remember to keep your flashlight handy and digital recorders ready. This is Katie Kulpa, signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.